In a moment that silenced the United Kingdom, Prince William stepped forward with a heartbreaking announcement, one that caught the entire royal family off guard. There was no royal parade, no ceremonial dress, just a solemn prince, visibly shaken, delivering news that would ripple far beyond the palace gates. His voice, steady but strained, carried the weight of something deeply personal. This wasn't just a public duty, it was an emotional confession. And within seconds, the entire nation felt the tremor. No one expected this. The media had speculated endlessly. Was it the king's health? A scandal buried under palace rugs? Or something even darker, tied to the lingering feud between the royal brothers? But what Prince William said struck a very different chord. One that had nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with pain. A quiet but deeply respected figure had passed away. Not a monarch, not a politician, but someone whose presence behind the scenes had shaped the royal household in more ways than the public ever knew. The man the world knew simply as Crackers, Graham Cracker, former royal bodyguard, was gone. Prince William's voice cracked for a brief second as he said the name, and that was all it took. A nation fell silent. This wasn't the typical royal obituary. Crackers wasn't born into the lineage of Windsor. He never wore a crown, but in that single announcement, William made it clear. This man mattered, more than many would ever understand. News spread fast. Social media exploded with speculation and sorrow. Royal watchers scrambled to understand the deeper implications. Why was this moment so raw for the future king? What secrets did Crackers hold? The loss wasn't just about one man's death. It was about everything he represented. Loyalty, protection, and a quiet strength that had helped William survive the most tragic chapter of his life. And yet, despite the nation's reaction, there was something unspoken in William's eyes, a flicker of memory, of trauma, of a wound not yet healed. The public sensed it, even if they couldn't name it. Crackers wasn't just a figure from the past. He was the last remaining bridge to a time that defined the royal brothers' identities, the time of Diana's death. His passing reopened doors long closed. Pain buried beneath duty was now rising to the surface. Journalists began to dig deeper. Who exactly was this man? Why did William feel compelled to publicly honor him in a way reserved only for royals and national heroes? The clues were scattered. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just a tribute. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Because as William's words faded into the air, a darker truth was beginning to stir beneath the surface. What Prince William revealed next would not only reopen old royal scars, but also bring one silent figure back into the global spotlight. He wasn't a royal by blood, but to William and Harry, he was family. In a world of crowns and formalities, where trust is a rare currency, Graham Cracker, known fondly as Crackers, was one of the very few who held the keys to the royal boy's inner world. For 15 long years, he wasn't just a bodyguard, he was a constant presence, a quiet protector, a source of laughter when the weight of legacy grew too heavy. His passing at 77 may not have made the front page of every international paper, but within royal walls, it felt like losing one of their own. Crackers entered their lives not as a symbol of power, but as a man of presence. Tall, thin, and unshakably loyal, he was first assigned to William and Harry during a time when the boys were too young to understand the magnitude of the institution they were born into. But over time, they began to lean on him, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. His badge might have said protection, but what he provided went far beyond that. He became a fixture in their lives, showing up at school gates, walking just a step behind them at royal events, always alert, always ready, but never intrusive. He knew his place always close, never in the way. And that delicate balance earned him something few could claim in the royal household: trust. After Princess Diana's tragic death, that trust became everything. Crackers wasn't just the man keeping them physically safe, he became their emotional shield. In the days when headlines screamed and cameras stalked their every move, he was there in the background, absorbing their silence, protecting their vulnerability. He didn't offer platitudes or pretend to understand their grief. He simply remained solid, steady, reliable. That kind of quiet strength is rare, and for William and Harry, it meant everything. His presence during those fragile moments wasn't just helpful, it was essential. Despite his role, Crackers was never a man who chased attention. He didn't cash in on royal gossip, he never sold his story. His loyalty was unwavering, even after retirement. But those closest to the family knew his worth. When William and Catherine married in 2011, Crackers was invited not as a former employee, but as someone who had earned his seat with years of quiet devotion. His jokes, sometimes juvenile, often hilarious, earned him affection not just from the princes, but from those around them. A former colleague once described him as an overgrown schoolboy. But behind that humor was a man who bore witness to one of the most tumultuous royal chapters in modern history. Now, with his death, a chapter quietly closes. But beyond the laughter and the duty, beyond the sharp suits and long drives, Crackers held pieces of a royal history that few ever saw. He knew what the boys endured when the cameras were off. He saw the pain behind their smiles, the loneliness behind their privilege. And those truths, the ones never spoken aloud, are what made his bond with them so unbreakable. But beyond his duty, Cracker held secrets about the royal boys that few ever knew. And it was in the darkest chapter of their childhood that Crackers became more than just a bodyguard, he became their silent anchor. When Diana died, the monarchy broke, but Crackers remained. As the palace scrambled behind closed doors, and the world grieved the loss of the most beloved royal of a generation, it was Graham Cracker, quiet, loyal, unseen, who stood at the center of the storm, anchoring two shattered boys who had just lost their mother. William was 15, Harry only 12. The cameras showed stoic faces and ceremonial bows, but behind those cold marble walls, there was chaos. And amidst the confusion, there was pain, raw, private, unspoken. That pain was something Cracker witnessed firsthand. He didn't just guard their safety in those hours, he guarded their grief. In the immediate aftermath of the crash, while the world speculated and headlines exploded, Cracker was already in motion. Not out of duty, but instinct. He had watched these boys grow. Now, he watched them break. Diana had been their light, their warmth, their constant in a life of royal rigidity. And now she was gone suddenly, violently, permanently. In the echo of that silence, Cracker became their only constant. He was there in the hallways, in the car rides, in the quiet moments between sobs and silences. Not speaking unless spoken to, not pushing past the grief, but sitting quietly inside it with them. When the funeral came, Cracker did not remain behind. He walked with them. Behind Diana's hearse, alongside the world's eyes, he moved not as a royal servant, but as a mourner, carrying the emotional weight of a family fractured. Every step he took was a tribute, not to his position, but to his promise. The promise he made the day he was assigned to protect those boys. A promise that now meant more than physical security. It meant holding them upright as their world collapsed. And when it came time to return Diana's body to Althorp, to the final resting place far from the noise and cruelty of the press, Cracker was part of the team that made that sacred journey. In that quiet drive, surrounded by flowers and unbearable silence, he fulfilled a duty that could never be written into any contract. Years later, Harry would write about those days with a tremble of remembrance, about how Cracker stayed nearby, shielding them in ways no one else could, about seeing him the morning after Diana's death, not dressed in black or performing protocol, but standing with him, beside him, saying simply, "I'm very sorry to hear your bad news." That sentence, so bare, was everything. It was acknowledgement. It was humanity. It was Cracker's doing what he always did, being present, without pretense. But grief has a long memory, and the wounds of 1997 still bleed into today's royal tensions, because when you lose a mother in front of the world, you don't just lose her once. You lose her again every time someone says her name, every time her memory is politicized, every time you look at your brother and remember you both once stood side by side in pain. And while one man stayed close to William, his bond with Harry would later be tested by a feud that shook the monarchy. Two brothers stood at the same funeral, but never said a word to each other. The world watched, breath held, hoping that perhaps this moment so steeped in history, loss, and personal pain would break through the icy silence that has haunted Prince William and Prince Harry for years. But what unfolded was not a reunion. It was a reminder that even the passing of a man who had once held their fractured world together couldn't thaw what had frozen between them. Crackers, the quiet guardian who once brought comfort to their darkest days, was now gone. And with his absence came a heavy silence that no words could fill. They arrived separately, stood apart, left in silence. Reports from those close to the scene described two men grieving in parallel, never crossing paths, never exchanging so much as a glance of acknowledgement. It was a chilling echo of Lord Robert Fellowes' funeral just a year prior, another event, where the brothers, once inseparable, stood within feet of each other yet remained emotionally galaxies apart. In the past, they would have leaned on each other. Today, they stood like strangers, and this time, the absence of reconciliation wasn't due to protocol or privacy. It was pain, raw, unresolved, and refusing to heal. Royal biographer Ingrid Seward offered a painful truth. Not even Crackers' death could mend the rift. If anyone could have brought them back together, it would have been him, the man who had stood beside them through their mother's funeral, who had quietly carried their grief without judgment or expectation. But this time, there was no emotional bridge, no shared comfort, just the cold space between two brothers who had once clung to each other in the backseat of a car, driven away from the news of their mother's death. The irony is brutal. Crackers, once a symbol of unity in their shared trauma, had become another casualty of the division. William clung to his memory like a lifeline, a reminder of stability in a world that constantly shifted beneath his feet. Harry, meanwhile, seemed to carry the weight of another loss. One more person gone from a past he now views through the lens of betrayal and abandonment. It wasn't just grief that separated them. It was perspective, pain experienced differently, wounds remembered through separate lenses, and yet, even in silence, their mutual respect for Crackers was clear. Both chose to show up. Both paid tribute in their own way. But no gesture could erase the gulf between them. This wasn't about a single argument or a tabloid headline. It was about years of unspoken resentment, misunderstood choices, and emotional walls built higher with every missed call, every misstep. Even Crackers, the man who once united them in grief, couldn't bring them together now. But who exactly was Crackers, and why did William cling to him long after the cameras disappeared? Behind every royal moment was Crackers, just out of frame. While the world saw polished photographs, ceremonial parades, and perfectly staged appearances, they missed the man who stood quietly in the background, always alert, always present. Graham Cracker didn't seek the spotlight, he avoided it with precision. But his presence, especially in William's life, was far more than professional. It was deeply personal. In a royal household where privacy is almost impossible and trust is earned inch by inch, Crackers carved out something rare. He became William's silent shield, a constant in a world where everything else seemed temporary or transactional. From the moment William entered the elite halls of boarding school, Crackers was there, not hovering, not interfering, but positioned just enough in the periphery to be felt. He accompanied William to Ludgrove and then Eton, always under strict instructions to remain in the background. His room was just next door, yet he was never invasive. He knew when to disappear and when to step forward. That's what made him invaluable. Because while teachers taught discipline and royal advisors preached protocol, Crackers provided something they never could: emotional safety. He offered no lectures, no judgment, just quiet, consistent presence. In the wake of Diana's death, that role became even more essential. The teenage prince was thrust into a storm of grief, expectation, and unbearable scrutiny. The public wanted strength. The palace wanted tradition. But William needed space, and Crackers gave him just that. Not with words, but with timing. Nod when needed. A quiet walk beside him when the world became too loud. He never filled the silence with unnecessary conversation, he let it breathe. That restraint, that understanding, was perhaps the most powerful gift he could give. There were moments the public never saw: private meetings with the Queen, emotional days returning to school after a funeral, dinners filled with awkward pauses and aching memories. Through it all, Crackers remained nearby, never pushing, always watching. He didn't try to be a replacement for the mother William had lost. He didn't try to be a mentor or a friend. He was something more complicated and more sacred. A witness to the boy who had to grow up too fast, to the young man burdened by a future he didn't ask for. And while Crackers respected the walls William built around his emotions, he never walked away. His comfort came not from advice, but from understanding what not to say. He was steady when everything else wasn't. His silence wasn't empty. It was full of meaning, full of memories, full of pain. Because Crackers wasn't just a quiet protector, he was also a mirror to the monarchy's pain. A reminder that the strongest figures in the royal family were often the ones who never spoke at all. And for Harry, the memories of Crackers weren't just protection, they were about survival. In his memoir, Harry said the one name that still made him smile: Crackers. Amidst a book filled with confrontation, buried trauma, and long-held frustration, that single name cut through the noise like a ray of warmth in a storm. Graham Cracker wasn't a headline, nor a royal advisor, nor a face that ever graced the balcony at Buckingham Palace. But to Harry, he was something far more important. He was safe. He was real. And in the swirl of broken promises and fading traditions, Crackers remained one of the few people Harry spoke of without bitterness. In Spare, Harry peeled back the layers of royal life and allowed the world into moments most couldn't have imagined. But when it came to Crackers, the tone changed. There was no resentment, no accusation, only affection. He recounted their shared jokes, juvenile, hilarious, and oddly comforting, in a world that often took itself far too seriously. Crackers wasn't polished or performative. He was the kind of man who knew when to laugh and when to say nothing at all. That rare balance made him not just a protector, but a companion, someone who saw the boys behind the titles. Harry didn't shy away from describing just how much Crackers meant to him. He called him likable, dependable, and solid. Words that, in royal circles, are often hard-earned and rarely spoken. But these weren't formal labels. They were heartfelt truths. Crackers had walked beside them, not just in duty, but in grief. He was there on the day everything changed. When the call came, when the palace halls turned cold, when the fairy tale was shattered in a Paris tunnel. Harry recalled with chilling clarity the moment he saw William walking their dog the morning after Diana's death. Crackers had noticed it too. The stillness, the sadness, the surreal weight of a world that kept moving even after their mother's heart had stopped. It wasn't a royal tragedy that morning, it was just a family torn apart. And Crackers had stood there, witness to all of it. He later shared how he crept downstairs to use the house phone, dialed the duty office at Buckingham Palace, and learned of the car crash. At first, they told him Diana had a broken arm. But when he found out the truth that she was gone, he admitted he didn't know how to process it. "You do get quite emotional about it," he said, his voice cracking under the memory. There was no need to embellish. His heartbreak spoke louder than any tribute ever could. Because Crackers had lived it, stood in it, absorbed it. And for Harry, that mattered more than titles or medals. In a palace where masks were required, Crackers never wore one. He felt deeply. He listened. He cared. And then, slowly, quietly, he stepped back. Because time passed, and with it came silence. Until now, Crackers retired quietly, but his post-royal years tell a story of purpose, charity, and quiet dignity. He didn't need a palace to live like royalty. He chose to serve his community instead. When Graham Cracker quietly stepped away from the royal fold in 2001, after more than 3 decades with the Metropolitan Police and 15 years inside the most guarded walls of Britain, he didn't vanish in bitterness or fade into irrelevance. Instead, he returned to something purer, service without spotlight. Crackers had spent his entire adult life protecting others, standing guard through history, trauma, and transition. But retirement didn't mean retreat. It meant redirection. And in his final years, he poured his quiet strength into the one place that never asked for crowns or protocol: his local community. After receiving the Royal Victorian Order from Queen Elizabeth, a rare and personal honor reserved only for those who had served the monarchy with distinction, Crakers could have leaned into the recognition. He didn't. There were no book deals, no televised interviews, no parade of former insiders clamoring for attention. He went back to East Hartford, a place where legacy wasn't measured by titles, but by actions. And there, he kept doing what he had always done best: showing up, volunteering with local charities, mentoring youth, supporting initiatives that required quiet hands and reliable hearts. In a world obsessed with image, Craker remained devoted to impact. Locals remember him not as a former royal guard, but as a neighbor. A man who showed up with groceries for a sick family. A man who listened more than he spoke. He didn't carry himself like a man who once walked beside kings. He carried himself like someone who never forgot where he came from. And perhaps that's what made his story so powerful. Behind the Buckingham gates, he had witnessed the worst and best of humanity. But in East Hartford, he lived his truth. Free of hierarchy, full of humility. Yet even in this quiet chapter, the echoes of his past remained. Royal aides still remembered his name with reverence. Prince William and Harry, no matter how distant, never forgot the role he played. And when news of his death broke, it wasn't just East Hartford that mourned. It was a ripple felt through two very different worlds. Because Craker, in his silence, had touched them both. He had bridged the divide between royalty and reality, not with words, but with presence. And as his legacy closes, one final question lingers: will his passing change anything within the fractured royal family? Will this shared grief crack the walls between two brothers now strangers? Or will Crackers, even in death, remain a symbol of what once held them together? As Prince William stood before the world to speak his name, it wasn't just grief he carried, it was a message. Prince William's voice cracked, but his message rang louder than ever. Standing in front of a grieving nation, stripped of the usual royal distance, he delivered not just a tribute, but a revelation. This wasn't about duty. It wasn't about optics. It was about a man who had meant everything in a world where very little felt real. Crackers wasn't just a bodyguard or a shadow trailing behind the crown. He was family. He was sanctuary. And as William's words echoed across the country, it became clear this moment wasn't about the man who protected the monarchy. It was about the legacy he left behind that may just save it. William didn't need to say much. The weight in his voice, the break in his expression, said everything. Crackers had been the one constant in a life that had spun wildly out of control more than once. In a palace riddled with secrets, betrayals, and heartbreaks, Crackers had symbolized something almost forgotten: loyalty without expectation, strength without arrogance, a calm force in a storm of titles and tradition. His passing didn't just leave behind silence, it marked the end of a rare kind of stability, one that wasn't enforced by crown or court, but by quiet, consistent presence. And now, that presence was gone. But with loss often comes clarity. And what the public saw in that moment was a different William. Not the polished heir, not the perfect prince, but a man grieving, reflective, and perhaps finally willing to show the fractures behind the firm royal image. The world watched him grow up behind walls, under scrutiny, beneath the weight of expectation. But here, in this single emotional gesture, he revealed what the monarchy often hides: vulnerability, humanity, and through that, strength. It's too early to say if this grief will bridge the distance between William and Harry, but Crackers' memory now belongs to both of them. He was a part of their shared history, the one that existed before the rift, before the interviews, before the exile and the silence. If there is ever to be a return to unity, it may begin here, in this moment of common pain, because Crackers wasn't just William's shield, he was Harry's too. And the echoes of Diana's loss, still visible in their every gesture, still lingering in their every choice, have now been stirred again by the death of the man who stood beside them when the world fell apart. But this isn't just about one man. This is about a royal family that must now reckon with its past, with how it treats its own, with what it chooses to protect and what it's willing to lose. Crackers represented the best of what the monarchy often fails to be. Loyal, grounded, compassionate, and silent when silence is more powerful than 1,000 speeches. His death is a reminder that strength isn't in tradition, it's in truth. Because in every royal farewell lies the beginning of the next royal chapter. And as Britain mourns the man behind the crown, one thing becomes clear. Crackers may be gone, but his memory will forever shape the future of the monarchy. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.